the next panel, we are speaking about the political outlook. Where do we go from here? What to expect in 2021? Because 2020 has been a very colorful year, marked by uncertainties in all dimensions and spectrums, be it in politics, economic, and also now health. So the questions I think we're exploring today is that will uncertainties lead to early general election in 2021? What are the possible political scenarios? Which political actors or coalitions will most likely form the government in the post-GE15? I'm guessing if you know the answer, you wouldn't be here, but I think it would be great to sort of have your take. And will GE15 end the political uncertainty and instability? We have a high-powered panel consisting of very esteemed speakers. So first we have YB Dr. Kelvin Yee, Member of Parliament for Bandar Kuching, which is a very young man, I admire. Second is YB Senator Yusmadi Yusoff, Chairman of the Senate Reform Working Committee, Chairman and founder of the Rights Foundation, whom I believe has been doing great work for many years. Datuk Nicole Wong, Siaw Ting, MCA National Youth Chairperson, Dr. James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies, University of Tasmania, Ms. Tricia Yeoh, CEO of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, Ideas Malaysia. This session will be moderated by Dr. Or Isan, Senior Fellow KSI, Senior Fellow of the KSI Institute, Senior Fellow for the Singapore Institute for International Affairs, and I might add, a regular contributor on Clubhouse, which I have always tuned in to listen. So Dr. Or Isan, the floor is definitely yours.
Well, thank you, Zaim, for the kind introduction of the subject of the panel, as well as of our distinguished speakers. So I think I would not waste any more time to introduce them, except to say we are all looking forward for them to illuminate our way as to the kind of political labyrinth or mess that we are in nowadays. So may I invite the first speaker, Dr. Kelvin Yee, to make his presentation for 8 minutes. As we said just now, at 6 minutes, there will be a ring, and then at 8 minutes, there will be you'll be rung twice, and we will have a lot of time, hopefully, for question and answer. So the time will start now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ooi. Thank you so much for having me here. And it's we are really in a very unprecedented times, I think, not just on the health or economic side, but also politically. Actually, as we are approaching 24th February, in a few days' time, it's actually a year anniversary after the infamous Sheraton move, where we saw the collapse of the PH government. And since then, actually, we have experienced what many term as political instability, as the current government and even the current PM majority has always been called into question, especially with movements within UMNO and BN that is not just clearly opposing the current policies of government, but actually some openly withdrawing support for the PM. And I believe this is why the PM called for an emergency in the guise of a pandemic. But even though we all know it's political in nature, I think even the PM now has even admitted that until now, none of the emergency power has been used to curb the spread of the disease. But what actually means is likelihood there will be no election until at least August. Of course, there are calls for ceasefire for politicking. But we know the current government as the incumbent, they're using this period to build their momentum, build their own preparations for their coming elections. We have seen all kinds of video of even the flag printings, senior ministers traveling to different states or even having different political events. So this has given a lot of underlying sentiments and impression that the current government is more occupied in staying in power rather than governing. I think since many policies that were released were not properly thought through, were confusing, and there were lots of flip-flops. For me, one of the biggest step back was the suspension of parliament during this emergency. For me, the best way to build confidence among businesses, among investors, and even the public is to show that there is a whole government, whole society approach to deal with this pandemic. But we see a reverse. And I'm not talking just about Parliament, but I'm a chairman of the Parliamentary Select Committee for Health, Science and Innovation. And we were not allowed to have proceedings due to this emergency laws or somehow curtailing our roles that we play. This is very, very disappointing because we play an important role, not just as check and balance, but to what I term commend and recommend. That means we also want to commend good policies by the current government to build public confidence and acceptance, especially the upcoming vaccination program. So personally, I don't see an election being called anytime soon, even after August, because I think politically the PM will only call it when he's confident to win and when his coalition's popularity is high. The condition for the election to be called is if COVID-19 will be controlled. And we know even by August, the whole vaccination program will not be completed. So it is very difficult to determine whether it will be controlled or not. But I believe it was termed vaguely so that to buy him time and he will determine when and where is best for him. That is why my view is the current government will use this current vaccination program to roll up popularity. I think that's one of the reasons why the PM selected YBKJ to head up the whole task force and be the face of the program, because instead of the health minister, because I believe he's seen as more accepted or believed by the general public. We all need this vaccination program to succeed. I'm fully supportive of it, but of course, we demand greater transparency, we demand greater accountability, and we need it to succeed. If not, the country is really in trouble. So I'm gonna go really brief what we expect to see politically. I'm from Sarawak, and we will definitely, number one, we will see the Sarawak elections at least delayed till August. And it's the first time, with high likelihood, in the first time since 1979, Sarawak may hold both the state and national parliament elections together. So I believe the state government wanted to have it together because they will drum up state nationalism, regionalism, strong sense of historical economical grievances to try to win back some of the seats that they lost during the GE14, especially in the rural areas, due to internal fighting and also waves of that time national issues of corruption, abuse of power in 2018. So political stability is the biggest question in everybody's mind. That's the million-dollar question. But if we are looking at the traditional way of politics or even traditional view on coalition politics in Malaysia, we may not even have a stable government even if an election is called. The 14G14 actually shows or started a whole new political dynamic for Malaysia. It ended the dominance of a single party, and Sheraton move actually opened doors for new forms of coalition politics, not like the one that we are accustomed to, and I'm mentioning about pre-election coalitions. I'm not saying that there will no more be any more pre-election coalitions, but things may be more fluid than before, especially at the rate that it's going, because for what I foresee, even if an election is called now, the outcome will be very even, especially in West Malaysia. Then this will actually make the Borneo states the kingmakers again. And will they choose sides pre-election or post-election? Like in Sarawak, I would assume GPS will want to contest using their own flag. And the question will be, are they going to be part of the PN coalition pre-election? So if not, technically, it does not stop other parties from contesting in Sarawak as well, even in the seats, in GPS seats. Unless, of course, there's a clear understanding. I believe this is the best interest of the current Prime Minister to have an understanding with GPS government. But if they are not formally part of the coalition, it opens up questions that they can come in as well. My personal stand is that Sheraton move has reshaped how we view coalition politics. And actually our best bet for political stability, which is of course good for the country, is for the Prime Minister to embrace or be open to the art of building new coalitions. There wouldn't be any more over-domineering Prime Minister. The job of Prime Minister is try to build cohesive coalitions and not just lord over everybody. So this can be achieved in many ways, but he has to be open to negotiate with many different coalitions. What we proposed actually from last year was a confidence and supply agreement. This is different from the unity government because that doesn't mean that there is no opposition, which is actually very bad for democracy. But there will be agreements between the coalitions on pertinent issues, and of course, in exchange for quid pro quos, especially bigger says in policies. And that's for me is the way we should be going if we want to see progress for our country. When coalition building is based on ideologies, policies, rather than just jotting for power. We are still so stuck in race and religion. but the public actually is sick of it. What we want to do is what policies can create a better life for me in the healthcare, corruption, livelihood, women empowerment, security, education, and stuff. So we must move away from individual leaders, but rather put together a collective leadership front, putting together a set of policies, ideas that resonate with all Malaysians, put forward cohort leaders with integrity, charisma, and of course, ability to govern. So the next election will be interesting, and I'm going to round it up with this. Key dilemmas that may affect the outcome. Number one, and my fellow colleague Nicole Wong is here. She will give a better insight on the dynamics in the end. But number one, will UMNO and BN have some sort of understanding with PN? Will there be another three-corner, multi-corner fights between them? Number two, will we, the opposition, unite under one banner and not just talking about PH, but PH plus, and move beyond the feud of individuals in the coalition itself? And of course, number three, where will the Borneo states stand in that? And with that, I end and summarize. Thank you so much. Back to you, Dr. Ooi.
Thank you, Dr. Yee, for your summary of the political scenarios at the moment, about the government building momentum for general election after emergency, but you think it's somewhat unlikely. The role of Parliament to command and to recommend. The role of Borneo states, Sabah and Sarawak to be kingmakers. The possibility of the Prime Minister as coalition builder, as well as the possibility of confidence and supply agreements. Next, we have Senator Yusmadi Yusoff, who is in the Reform Committee for the Senate. Thank you.
Thanks, Moderator. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I have to say, I don't have a definite answer for what's going to happen in Malaysia political outlook for 2021. The reason I said so because on my way back to Penang, to my village in Balik Pulau, I prepared something. On my way, I stopped in Georgetown. I started to validating what I prepared, and it turns out to be something else. And a few days back, last 2 days, I was in Kampong with all the villagers. When I validate what I prepared with them, it's totally something else. So what I'm trying to say, what is happening now really needs a bit of humility among politicians, policymakers, to really understand the situations. The reason I said so far, as far as I'm concerned, across the east, from the east to the west, what more in Malaysia, nobody really take the advantage to understand what actually the underlying things behind COVID-19. At least from my humble observation, and I feel it, COVID really asks us to go back to basic, whereby it doesn't recognize it is a colorblind, it is a status blind, it is try to close the gap between rich and poor. And at the same time, we see for the last 60 years, new political dynamic is happening. That's number one, the way I look at it. But no one really take the advantage of to really understand what is this COVID-19. I'm not talking about whether it's a disease or is what. What is the underlying things behind COVID-19? That's point number one. Point number two, what is happening in Malaysian politics, I can illustrate in this manner. We are having a parliamentary democracy, and a Rich Commission has set up two houses, the upper house and also the lower house. And Pasal 44 of the Federal Constitution say, Parliament consists of Agong, Dewan Negara, and also Dewan Rakyat. What's happening now, you are talking about the kind of like the heart of a Malaysian politics, where you have two houses not only being blocked, but being suspended. So the very oxygens of the heart, which rely very much on the voice of the people, in the form of representative democracy through the elected representative, being suspended. So the very idea of parliamentary democracy, which may give you they call democratic accountability, as Fukuyama said in his latest book, is not there. So that's point number two. Point number three, what I see and what I've been seeing until today is just another animal farm, what we call it politik kandang. You know what is politik kandang? They thought, look here, by giving pellets, by giving foods to whoever their circle of friends, they can achieve something. So for me, with all this scenario, let try to predict, so to speak, what's going to happen. For me, number one, the way I look at it, as much as everyone be using these big words called reset, I think it's not reset. It's just another realignment. Number two, when everyone was talking about new coalition, pre or post coalition, for me, it's not even coalition. It's just another new fraction, or in the Malay words, I call it kandang. You try to bring your own circle, and then from there you try to maneuver within a very fragile coalition. But in Malaysia, the very idea of coalition, frankly speaking, which was only effectively being practiced by Barisan Nasional. I was part of Pakatan Rakyat, and Pakatan Rakyat crumbled less than 100 days when Anwar was detained. Number two, now we have a PH, and the way PH is functioning today, I think we need to improve the very idea of coalition politics. For example, you have Anwar as a number one, and you have another party president from other coalition party, but you are looking at sometimes they do press statements or conferences, not in a very concerted effort. So I think the only successful coalition which I've seen since independence until today from Perikatan Barisan Nasional is Barisan Nasional. And I don't want to talk about Perikatan Nasional because they're not even a proper coalition. And why all these things happen? From my limited observation, we have problem because there is something in Malaysia, from my understanding, I call it the power of incumbency, where people tend to rely on and establish things. And in this context, Malaysians are so used to Perikatan and then so used to Barisan Nasional. But Barisan Nasional formula of coalition, so to speak, is obsolete. But before they managed to come up with a better, I would say, coalition model or formula, somehow there's so many pandemic within their coalition, which is corruption and so many other problems. Okay, last point, which I would like to highlight. What are we going to see in 2021 or onwards? I, as usual, I have to say, being an accidental politician, come into politics during the Reformasi time, I don't really have a clear idea what's politics. But for me, it both go back to the very basic that, look here, we need to instill what is the very purpose of politics in Malaysia. Because I see the very idea of state now crumble, the very idea of civil society it somehow being dismantled slowly because everyone being co-opted. So when I say that, I would love to see more, I call it political opportunism. When I say political opportunism, not in the negative form. Political opportunism, for me, it's open doors to any visionary politician to have a big idea again. What is the big vision? What is the big agenda for Malaysia? And it gives opportunity for the youngsters, especially the youth, to participate, because COVID-19 somehow dismantled the very hierarchical, vertical and horizontal Malaysian politics. The reason I said so, post last election, I've seen a new dynamic. I have to congratulate Muda, Syed Sadi and the gang. I also have to congratulate that now there are attempts by independent among professional, among civil society activists to form a kind of a group to participate in coming election. But I've seen that the same in the previous election, but I hope post-COVID they can do better. So when I say political opportunism, I also would like to see a more, I would say, participation among the newcomers. The reason I said so, for the last 20 years, especially since 2008, at least from my personal point of view, when I was in Dewan Rakyat, I've seen there are many new, I would say, quality politicians to replace I would say, I don't want to use these words, but I use veteran politicians to really lead this country in whatever form, as a cabinet members, as a party leaders. The reason I said so, politics, as much as someone may say now, the young, the youth, or many other people don't want to talk about politics, I would like to call that, look, have more politics. But what kind of politics? A good politics. And my concluding remark is this. While we have these problems of, half-baked understanding what the COVID is about, what COVID gives us, while we are looking at all the idea of parliamentary democracy being suspended, while I'm talking to you, Doctor, actually I'm no more the chairman of the Senate Reform Committee or no more a chairman of caucus of Dewan Negara. The day the new speaker be appointed, everything be abolished. But at the same time, I have to congratulate, there are a few bipartisan efforts on electoral reform, on the pushing for anti-hopping law. Myself, Datuk Nazri from UMNO, Halimah Siddiqui from UMNO, which is a minister, and then the Datuk Awang from Pendang, from PAS, and Datuk Jori Abdul. So for me, I would love to see more what I call it politik muafakat. When I mean by politik muafakat, a leader who are competent enough, has a good temperament, to be a consensus builders, to be able to cross the divides, and more importantly, have a bigger interest in his mind. So I would like to conclude, while people say that 2021 going to be something very, very uncertain politically, no, I have to say, from the more hopeful remark, I've seen more opportunity for good ideas, good talent to participate, because all this while, for the last 60 years, this talent been suppressed, and I think COVID-19 be able to unleash the space, and give more opportunity for the talent to participate. And I have to say this at a personal note, while many of friends of mine from Keadilan crossing the Rubicon, Doctor, I think there are still a bunch of us who started the Reformasi who tried to reverse the Rubicon. We will never cross the Rubicon until we finish the work. And I have to say this because I still getting good remark from YB Nurul Izzah, YB Nick Nazmi, and a few guys, a few more from DAP, a few more from civil society. I think we will fight. And of course, we need support from like-minded friends, from various stakeholders. So in order to make things happen for 2021, if assuming election happen around the corner, I think let's come back with bigger agenda. And this agenda for me, only about a just Malaysia, about a fair Malaysia, but inclusive Malaysia. You have to be politik adil, politik democratic, politik yang inclusive, politik yang lestari, sustainable. So let's do it for the sake of Malaysia.
Thank you, Senator Yusmadi, for really going into the cut and chase of politics. He talked about the difficulty to make a prediction nowadays, as we need to understand the basic of this pandemic, the new political dynamic that is going on, including, for example, regretting that parliamentary democracy has been suspended. Senator Yusmadi also compared realignment versus reset, coalition versus what he called fraction. Also the problem with the power, this obsession with the power of incumbency. And he hopes that there could be some sort of political opportunism in that young people with new vision could participate more in politics, that there could be some sort of politik muafakat. I noticed he called himself an accidental politician who has not crossed the Rubicon yet. And I also noticed he has, as his backdrop, instead of our standard KSI backdrop, this poster about Lelaki di Sebalik Pulau, as well as, if I see correctly, some sort of Chinese newspaper cutting. So I guess that sets a background to the multiculturalism in this country. As we welcome the next speaker from MCA, my good friend Datuk Nicole Wong, who will also share with us her perspective. Datuk Nicole Wong, please.
Hi, my friend, Dr. Ol and the fellow colleagues. Hi, okay, I without any delay, I shall start with my presentation. I think despite the political hiccups and the roller coaster ride that Malaysians are still riding on, I think, since 2018. In my opinion, it is not all doom and gloom moving forward. Some positive signs that have emerged, like youth participation in politics. We can finally look forward to our youth to play a greater role in the politics and the governance of our country. With the rise of social media, the playing field has been somewhat leveled. Money, through important, is not the only thing to success in politics anymore. So I mean, in recent years, just looking at ASEAN, we see youth playing a very big role. In fact, we call it bigger role. All right, look at our neighbors in Indonesia. They have the Indonesia Solidarity Party by Indonesian youth. In Thailand, then they now ban the Future for Party in Thailand. It's a great example of youth playing a greater role. At home, as Malaysia, we have the establishment of MUDA, I shall say, by YB Sadiq, and of course, traditional political parties placing huge importance on youth as well. So, I mean, in MCA, of course, come back to ourselves. In MCA, we tried, and then we actively encourage and allow youth from all walks of life to come in and play a meaningful role as well. As a chairperson of the youth section in MCA, I have seen the influx of ideals and youth since the fall of BN in 2018. And the change of BH to PN, some like what YB just said, maybe the PN government are not recognized or whatsoever. From the falling of PH to PN and things like that. And it is my responsibility to cultivate and to groom our youth to hopefully be the future leaders to our country that we can be proud of. But anyway, I think, of course, by now we need to stand together to fight with the same goal, bigger same goal, which is fight with the COVID. Okay, as we are a relatively young nation with a rough estimate of 60% of our population below the age of 40, we can actually look forward to the gradual erosion of elitist policies and more policies being made in favor of the development of youth. The future looks bright for Malaysia eventually, provided we can set aside petty differences and work together towards a common goal, as what I said just now. However, we often hear that question of what is the point of voting at all and things like that. It is concerning that many are questioning, in the need and even vote, especially if politicians continue by indulge in political games, such as switching political parties as they wish and foregoing any affiliation to ideology, all the principles of they are supposed to have as representative of the people who voted them into power. So the shining lights that I believe this signals as a welcome switch also to people voting to the person instead of the political party. Vote for someone with integrity and principles that you believe, of course, instead of voting the flag without cares of who you are actually voting in. So, for one example, is voting a candidate who has no tie or knowledge about a particular state or a parliamentary seat, just because the flag is what the voters want, is something that will benefit them. I highly doubt so. Let's place more importance on the candidate instead of the flag for the upcoming GE. it is our best interested to do so, by here. So, I mean, Undi 18 is one of the topic that we cannot ignore. In fact, we need to push forward. Okay, as such, Undi 18 is something that we need to collectively push through, regardless of parties and all that. Back in August 2000, Dato Sri Takiuddin, the minister in charge of Parliament and Law, said that the implementation of the 18 years old voting age and automatically voters registration is expected to commence on no later than July 2021, which is around the corner. Okay, let's make Undi 18 happen. To me, it's a must, as it's about empowering youth, young person, young people, and they should given a trust to decide for themselves. It's our job as our senior to impart our experience and knowledge, and not simply say, they can't vote just because they are too young, or they are too naive, not matured enough. So I think maturity in voting and political awareness should not be limited to those who are 21 and above. So because age alone doesn't determine a person's maturity level. Those who are older and said to be wiser, also do not necessarily have more understanding, of the political system and also the role of state institutions, maybe. So for a political party or coalition to have a better chance in next G, I think it's about who is able to capture the hearts and mind of youth. Not just, some empty promises, a lot of sweet promises, but, at the end of the day, it's not happened. But it's with a real reactional policies. So when it comes to GE 15, I have a few things on mind, to answer if there will be a, GE 15 in 2021. So I think most likely the answer, everyone's know that the Yama Bromat Prime Minister has said that what if once the the COVID-19 pandemic is contained, which is result in the lifting of the emergency, so Parliament will dissolve and then GE took place. There are no indication that the PM will not stick to what was promised, as we do need a GE soon, I think, to return the mandate to the Rakyat to elect the leaders of the country. A fresh mandate needed. To me, I think a fresh mandate needed for everyone. However, a likely outcome after G15 is once again like now. With no single coalition commanding a solid majority support and having a horse trade and ties each other to form the government, which this would seem like win for a democracy, as evidenced by the fall of PH government. The reality is not so simple. In short, not so simple. Yeah, okay. Can BN win it alone? One more question. Or PN or PH, or it seems that unlikely at this point of time. UMNO and PBBM together with PAS, hold the share of voters. And what if they can't work together and things? This is what's happening right now. But can later on, can everyone just because of fighting with the common goal, the common ground, so that everyone come back together? I think this is still a question mark. But what we need to work even harder, or push even harder for this, work together. So I think without parties forming the government, finding consensus and sharing the same policy ideology, we will be back to the square one. At the end, we'll be back to the square one and come all over again. Okay, so the ruling coalition will be constantly threatened and blackmailed by lawmakers seeking to withdraw support unless their demands are met or something like that. So I mean, last but not least, all is not lost. However, one thing that we can look forward to is that political coalition cannot be in form of a marriage of convenience. It must be formed with a common goal and ideology in mind. So something that the voters must demand come GE 15. My sharing, yeah. Thank you, Dr. O. Thank you for reminding.
Yep. Thank you very much, Datuk Nicole Wong. She talked about the role and the rise of youth in politics, and also elitist policy versus capturing the heart of mind of youth. She decried that many are questioning the need to, well, just go out to vote. But she felt that candidates are at least as important as the flags or logos of parties in elections. She hopes that only 18 could be implemented soonest. And she thinks that the general election is indeed coming soon, but the messy scenario that we are in may continue afterwards. So she felt that it is very important for a coalition to be based on, for example, common ideologies versus marriage of convenience. So next, we will welcome my other good friend, Professor Dr. James Chin from the University of Tasmania, to share his perspective.
Thank you very much, Ethan. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'd like to thank KSI for the opportunity to speak to all of you today. So given the fact that I don't have a lot of time, I'll try to be very, very brief on several main points. I think I'll start by answering the question about GE15. I think it is too early to try to second guess what GE15 is about, for a very simple reason that we have a funny situation where on the government side, one party in the government, UMNO, wants to trigger an early general election, while the other party that holds the prime ministership, Bersatu, wants to delay as long as possible. So it's very difficult to say whether a GE will go ahead this year or whether it will be delayed further. Secondly, I think it's also presumptuous on us to try to guess who actually will be the prime minister when the GE comes around. I think everything is up in the air. If you try to read the tea leaves, it's very, very obvious that there's a strong faction, UMNO, who wants to trigger further instability in the PN government. In fact, they want to pull out of the PN government during the UMNO GA, that was General Assembly that was supposed to be held at the end of January. And it was the emergency that stopped all this. But discussions are still holding on in the background. And my understanding is that there's still quite a big chunk of UMNO people who thinks that, things are not working out and that they really need to pull out this government and force a GE as soon as possible. So I think going forward for the rest of this year and the coming years, I think the key word is political instability. And I think the political instability will come mostly from the Malay community themselves. And I want to spend a bit of time explaining why I think this is the case. I think it doesn't matter how you look at it, Perikatan Nasional will forever be unstable. And the reason is very simple. I think one of the earlier speakers spoke about this. If you look at the period when Malaysia was actually very stable, it was during the rule of Barisan Nasional. Now, what were one of the key elements of Barisan Nasional? The key element of Barisan Nasional is that you have one core Malay party and you can have as many parties as you want representing the other political interest groups or ethnic groups, but you can only have one core Malay party. So that was how Barisan Nasional became very stable. What do you have now? What you have is basically two core Malay parties in government now, each trying to be the dominant one. You have UMNO on the one hand, plus Bersatu on the other. So basically, as the Chinese say, you have two tigers on the same mountain, and that mountain can only support one tiger. So until this issue is resolved, you really cannot have any stability in the PN government. You also have instability in the PN government because each of the parties in the PN government are trying to increase the support among the Malay community. This means that all the three current parties, the core parties, UMNO, Bersatu, and PAS, they're all basically fighting over the 110 rural Malays. They're trying to do it in such a way that there will be a clear winner in the upcoming general election. I'm sure you all know in the last GE, the vote was basically split three ways. They're all trying to make sure that you do not have a return of this scenario in the next GE, that there will be a clear winner in the Malay seats. So therefore, you have one Malay dominant party again. So that's on the Malay party side, and why I think it will be unstable for some time to come. It will only be stable once you have one dominant Malay party. And I think big parts of the Malay establishment can come around this view that, and you can see some of the policies that are being pursued. For example, PN, just recently they allowed Gerakan to join up. Again, you can see that they're trying to rebuild PN 2.0. One core Malay party and multiple parties representing other interest groups. So that's the first point. The second point is something I was alerted to by YB Kelvin, which is the Sarawak state elections. I think this year they're going to hold it whether they like it or not due to the constitutional requirements. The only slight disagreement I have with YB Kelvin is that I don't believe that the Sarawak state government GPS wants to hold a concurrent elections. I think they would do what they can to try to have a separate elections. I don't think they want it to go in together unless they're forced to. Right now, if you go to the ground, it's quite obvious that GPS has the upper hand. And I say that for a very simple reason that the opposition is fragmented. The opposition blocks basically consist of PH Sarawak and a group called PSB, led by the former finance minister of Sarawak, Wong Sun Ko. These are basically the two big blocks. But within the PH itself, it's actually DAP, which is the most stable party. They have a good machinery. They're likely to win in the urban areas again. The only group that is sort of up in the air right now is basically the Bidayu voters. The other groups are basically quite stable. So for example, I expect the Malay Muslim community to keep supporting PBB in GPS. The Chinese majority will go over to DAP. Dayaks majority will go to GPS again. So it's really the issue of Bidayu seats, whether they're up in the air or not. So in terms of the Sarawak state election, what I expect is that GPS to win again, but I do not think they will get the same majority they had the last time around. Last time around, they had sort of a super majority. They won 72 out of 82 seats. I don't think they will get a similar number of seats. They might lose a few, but by and large, unless something very big happens, I doubt very much that the opposition can actually win, especially given the fact that they can't come together as a united front. Third thing I want to speak about, of course, is Undi 18. I think Undi 18 is a crucial issue. If you read what the young people are saying, I think there's lots of anger in the community that the current government is trying to delay under 18 voters. I think it's quite clear that based on all the previous research that's been done in Malaysia, that if they were to reduce the voting age to under 18, the people who benefit will be the current opposition. Okay, so I think the 18 will not happen for next GE unless there's a concerted push by civil society. But again, having said that, we have seen that because of COVID-19, this government basically can ignore a lot of the wishes of the public. So basically, my summary is that political stability will stay with us for the rest of 2021. And this political stability is not only in PN, but it's also in Barisan Nasional, and it's also in Pakatan Harapan, because we also have no clear leadership in Pakatan Harapan as well. I think if the early GE were to happen, I don't think it will lead to political stability. I also believe that, like the previous speaker, that the voting pattern, if a general election is held, will be fairly similar, and that there will be a lot of horse trading immediately after the general election. Sabah and Sarawak with 57 MPs, I think will play a very, very important role once the results come out. I think the other point I want to make about Sarawak is that the results of the Sarawak election, assuming it's a separate election, cannot be used as a barometer for what will happen to the rest of Malaysia. Sarawakians vote in a very peculiar way, in some ways a very parochial view of the world. So you cannot use the pattern of the Sarawak state election and say that this will likely be the pattern for the rest of Malaysia. And finally, I just want to say that by and large, very sad to say that Malaysian politics is regressing. I think the big lesson that we learned in the past year after the fall of the Pakatan Harapan government is that the non-Malays are no longer part of the equation. I think the part of the equation has been taken over by Sabah and Sarawak. And I think that one of the clear signs that Malaysian politics is regressing is that you can see the number of people who are trying to get out of Malaysia. One of the most interesting statistics, which is not widely known in Malaysia, is that if you look at the people applying asylum in other countries, asylum in other words, you're trying to get out and get into those countries, not through the normal visa system, but try to apply as asylum. You just look at Australia. It is quite interesting that if you look at the applicants for people applying for what they call protection visa in the Australian system, right? For 2 years in a row, right? The biggest applicant actually came from Malaysia. And I'm not joking. These are public figures. So for example, in the year 2018 to 2019, right? There were more than 8,000 people Malaysians who tried to apply for protection visas. It's quite interesting because we know that Malaysia, we don't really have a civil war or things like that, but still they try their luck to apply for a protection visa in Australia. So this tells me that even the ordinary people are losing faith in the system and they're trying to get out. Finally, my final comment is that I do not see any circuit breaker on the horizon. I don't see a way out. The reason I say that is because the current political elites are still in control of the system, and there is no political force outside the current political elites who are capable of coming in to break the current political situation. So it's basically the same players. The same players we have in the 1970s, 80s, 1990s, 2000, they're still the same play calling the shots today. But unfortunately, they're running out of ideas, but they're not willing to share power with anybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. James, is of the opinion that indeed Malaysia is still politically in a rather messy state with at least UMNO and Bersatu contending to be the core Malay party. And as long as they are still fighting with each other, Malaysian politics would perhaps be unstable for the foreseeable future. You talk about Sarawak election, that the ruling coalition in Sarawak is likely to win again as the opposition is split, the Bidayu community being the kingmaker, but that the Sarawak elections results perhaps would not be indicative of the results of the next general election. He felt that Undi 18 is unlikely to be carried out in the next general election, that Malaysian politics perhaps is regressing, as could be witnessed in the large amount of asylum applications overseas. And he regrets that there are, well, unfortunately, no political circuit breakers who could indeed break the political impasse in the country, as we have the same cast of actors from the 1980s. So thank you, James. And I would like to welcome also my good friend, Tricia Yeoh from Ideas, to share her opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Isan, and very good morning, or actually afternoon now. And thank you, KSI, for inviting me to speak. I will try not to repeat some of the points that have already been said by my other esteemed panelists. I'm just going to quickly talk about GE15. I don't want to speculate about when it will actually happen, but I think the Ideas position that we've taken is that essentially, if it becomes safe to do so, we should immediately opt to have the dissolution and election, given the current situation where the majority, I think, is also questioned, the majority of the current government. Okay, I'm going to go into 6 points, so 6 trends of what I think are going to determine the way politics is going to be for the rest of the year, including what will happen in the election. Some of the points have already been said, so I won't spend too much time on that. I'll spend more time on the points that have not yet been said. So number 1, I think everyone agrees that there is political fragmentation at an unprecedented level. No single dominant party that collapsed in 2018 will now rule Malaysia, and the political fragmentation is also happening not just within the ruling coalition, but also within the opposition. So I think we've talked a lot about that. I won't spend too much time. My second point, or the second trend, is that yes, identity politics will be the order of the day, and it seems to have increased since 2018. So what happened between 2018 to 2020, when the PH government in fact tried to reverse that, saw the trend of it actually returning with a much stronger emphasis after its collapse. And partly this was because UMNO and PAS had spent quite a lot of its energy and investment while being outside of Parliament, working together closely and targeting what they said was a DAP-run government. So again, on this trend of identity politics, I think similar to what some of the panelists have already said, the idea is to have this, primarily Malay-Muslim coalition. But I think one caveat there is that UMNO, PAS, and Bersatu, in my opinion, will not be able to be in coalition together long-term, given the fact that there are competition for seats. Ultimately, the goal for people like us, think tanks and civil society, is how do we professionalize politics? And we need to be able to understand the system well enough to understand also what is the system that can incentivize the professionalization of politics. We all accept that politics today is not policy driven by any measure. And this is frustrating for those who are working in public policy, because we want to push public policy into the political arena. Unfortunately, that's not the decision-making measure by which they decide on how to be in coalition and how they decide to win over votes. We need to be able to figure out that system and what the incentives are. And I'm of the belief that the incentives exist. We just need to be able to figure that out. So that's the second one. The third point and the third trend. So this is something that was not touched on as much. So I want to talk about the subnational trends. So some of us have already talked about what's happening in Sabah and Sarawak. James talked about how Sarawak and Sabah will ultimately be the kingmakers. And of course, we know, Sarawak state election will be delayed. But I want to talk about how, since the collapse of PH and the rise of Perikatan Nasional, we've also seen some interesting trends. So for instance, primarily because of political reasons, you managed to see a very unusual phenomenon in the state of Perak, where the DAP actually supported the coming into power of the new Menteri Besar on the back of a confidence and supply agreement, which has been unprecedented in Malaysia. If you recall, there were some calls from civil society, including ourselves, during the first time that the Prime Minister called for the emergency declaration, which was the end of last year, saying that there is an alternative, and the alternative is to have a confidence and supply agreement between the ruling coalition and the opposition, where the opposition agrees to provide the confidence required for the government to be in place in exchange for certain things. And that is precisely what happened in Perak. So what happened in Perak is that the DAP and the opposition there, in the state opposition, essentially received the things that they had requested for, things like equal constituency development funds. So the CDFs are what is provided for by the government to all the government or opposition members of the state assembly equally. Following what happened in Perak, you also see the same thing happening in Johor. So the Johor Menteri Besar has also said that he is committed to providing these equal CDFs. So these are the funds that are given to the elected representatives to do their society and their community work. And you also said something, you also heard the same thing happening in Perlis. So Perlis also said that they would be committed to providing something on an equal measure. So this is interesting, where I think what you will see perhaps in the next election is that there'll be different, perhaps, coalitions at the federal and at the state level, and possibly also different coalitions within the states, from state to state. So again, after PH fell, there were, for a very short time, different coalitions in different states, where Bersatu at that time, if you remember, had not decided yet which way it was going to go. So that's an interesting trend. Additional trend on the subnational front is that I think PAS and UMNO, even though they're in coalition at the federal government, will also be in competition at the state governments of Terengganu and Kelantan because they have been long-term competitors there. So will that actually change if they're still competing, if they're not competing with each other anymore at the national level? Finally, again, on the subnational front, I think the three Pakatan Harapan states, Selangor, Penang, and Negeri Sembilan, have said that they don't want to dissolve. They want to go through the full term. And this is seemingly supported by the ruler in Selangor and rulers of Selangor and Negeri Sembilan. So that would be very interesting if they choose not to dissolve. So that's the subnational front. My fourth point was on Undi 18 and the youth vote. I won't go there. That's been talked about a lot already. But just an addition to the youth vote is about urbanization as well. So we know that, you know, Malaysia is at the very high rate of urbanization and what that will mean for the voting trends. Despite the fact that a lot of Kelantanese live outside of Kelantan, you know, they eventually do go back to Kelantan to vote, and the urbanization in that sense, I think what political scientists had predicted in the past was that urbanization would mean higher level of education and therefore more supportive of the opposition, but I don't think that's necessarily true. So we just cannot go on conventional wisdom. The fifth trend is the opposition success. I already talked about the three states, but I think the future of the PH or PH plus, as some panelists alluded to, will be dependent on the PKR leadership. So I think that if PH does not include other splinter opposition parties like Muda and Pejuang, then they will be in competition for similar seats if they don't work together as one large coalition. And I think I'm going to be on time here. My last point and trend number 6 is ultimately on economics. So I know that this panel is on politics, but we all know that ultimately voters vote based on where they feel their pockets are hurt the most. And I think this is very, very important. Following the post-pandemic conditions, it really depends on how successful the government is going to roll out the national immunization plan, as well as apart from the immunization, how it manages the COVID situation as well. I think the government has not done as well in the last 6 months as it did previously. There was a poll that was conducted by Merdeka Center last year that Perikatan Nasional was the most popular coalition among all the other coalitions. I do believe that if the polling were to be done today, that might change. Simply because I think the public has seen the mismanagement, but the unequal treatment given to politicians and to the general public. The way in which politicians, for example, or ministers would now only be given a 3-day quarantine compared to everyone else returning from overseas who would be given a 10-day quarantine. So the handling of the NIP would be really important as the country goes through economic recovery. So those were my 6 points and 6 trends: political fragmentation, identity politics, subnational trends, Undi 18, urbanization, opposition success, and ultimately the economic question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tricia. She outlined 6 points, for example, the rise of identity politics nowadays after perhaps the change of government last year, the need to incentivize so-called the professionalism in politics, and especially think tanks in the country would have an especially important role in incentivizing such political professionalism. She also mentioned some very interesting sub-regional trends, such as the confidence in supply agreement in Perak, various previously unthinkable coalitions in many states, that whether PAS and UMNO would still come together or would they oppose each other in Kelantan and Terengganu. On Undi 18, she also mentioned that we also had to pay attention to urbanization and how that would affect the voting patterns. Opposition success, in Tricia's opinion, would depend to a large extent on the PKR's leadership. And she concluded with saying the economic performance of the government, as well as how the government manages the COVID pandemic, as well as its successful rollout of the immunization policy, would all be key to whether this government is likely to last longer in the or after the next general election. Now we have about, I successfully applied for extension of time. We have until 12:30, which means we have about 18 minutes left for questions and answers. So far, I have, I think, only 1 or 2 questions on the chat room. So could the attendees, the participants, please list down more questions so that our panel could answer your questions. Now, I have a question here from one of the participants in the United Kingdom. He is worried that Malaysia is no longer a very attractive destination for foreign investment, as reported by UNCTAD, a UN agency. So how to, in a sense, root for Malaysia, how to promote Malaysia's image overseas so that Malaysia could indeed become once again a very attractive destination for investment. And since Tricia, you mentioned economics being key, could you start start the ball rolling by answering this?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think this is really important. The trend is that, well, I mean, okay, let me backtrack a bit. So one of the a major development was this downgrade by the Fitch rating agency, and in that rating report, it talked specifically about 2 things. One was the political instability, and 2 was the kind of lack of governance and institutional reforms that the Malaysian government has not quite indicated its commitment towards. So neither of these things, as you have heard on the panel, will be able to be really committed to in the current situation. Political stability, I think everybody wants that, but as you've heard, it's not going to be achieved anytime soon, simply because of the nature of politics right now, the fragmentation. And I think, honestly, I think this is where we all Malaysians need to become used to the fact that there will not be a single dominant party. We need to be used to the kind of fractiousness and coalition building that will require post-elections. The second question on governance, and the second answer I would say is whether the government is really committed to the institutional reforms that it needs to put forward in order to gain back investment confidence and investor confidence. And at the moment, I would say that that's also a great concern at the moment. I don't see at the moment that the government will be able to do that, which is why, and this is also a complicated answer, which is why we have talked about the importance of signing regional and international multilateral agreements, trade agreements, because sometimes these agreements put pressure on Malaysia to reform ourselves. So yes, it is external pressure, it is not internal pressure, but waiting to see whether it will happen internally, that doesn't seem to be the case. It's not going to happen. So if we sign on for the CPTPP, and we have already signed on to the RCEP, but it's still being rolled out, I think that will give us pressure to reform our public procurement system to ensure more transparency and accountability, to reform the way we do our GLCs, so the state-owned enterprises. That's really important. So these are the big 2 stumbling blocks, I think, that prevents the private sector from really flourishing. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Would other speakers like to join in the answers? How to promote investor confidence, especially overseas? Okay. Yeah. Well, for me personally, I think sometimes it's also comparatively speaking. If you look around some other Southeast Asian countries, you have Vietnam and so on, which are also doing quite well in attracting foreign investments, Philippines, Indonesia. But of course, there are also countries politically which are even more regressive than ours, such as what has just happened to Myanmar and so on. So sometimes you need to lay out perhaps a greater perspective. Now, there is another question here from the Facebook. What would be some of the fair and also effective solution so that resources and prosperity could indeed be shared among all the people in Malaysia. I repeat, what are some of the fair and effective solutions where resources and prosperity could be shared among all the people in Malaysia? This is a very general question. Perhaps, I think YB Yusmadi, perhaps you take a first step at this.
I'm not trying to say that I have the answer, but suffice to say that before I came back from United States in 2007 with Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, we make a very big decisions. We say, look here, no enough of a racial-based policy. Let's try new economic agenda based on needs. So I told him, boss, look here, it's going to be political suicidal to go against new economic policy. It's not easy. As everyone said, our politics is very communal. But having a real political experience on the ground at a public policy level, I've seen a different connotation. At least we went through 2000 election successfully. We went 2013 election successfully. We went 2018 successfully. But the difference between 2018 and 2013 is that we have different kind of collision. But we have different kind of, I would say, normative agenda, whereby 2008, 2013, we are so clear. We're going to go, look here, we're going to go on a very just and fair parameters. So when you have that kind of idea at the top leaders as your vision, the rest will be easily trickled down because it comes to the rule of law, it comes to so many other mechanisms. Because for me, I agree with Tricia, the main enemy of public policy is politics. I understand that. So for me, if at the political leadership level, there is a strong commitment, look here, no more racial politics, no more a flawed idea of a dichotomy between rural and urban. Rural and urban are equally important. So it may transcend or give a new groundbreaking to Malaysian politics, and hopefully it affect the very idea of to have a shared resources. So for me, it has to start at the very top leadership level, and that commitment has to be consistent. And I have to admit, 22 months that so-called we are in the government, we are kind of shifting from the very idea. That's why not to say that I agree completely with what Tricia said about that keadilan has to really be strong and credible. But from normative point of view, I've seen what happened in Ukraine. I've seen what happened in Zimbabwe. The very force of the party or coalition which caused the change must be credible, must be sustainable. So what does it mean is a question of leadership. So for me, in order to, I'm not trying to, I don't think so I really answered the question, but at least I'm convinced if the top leadership give a strong, consistent, not ambivalence to the commitment of just and fair politics, I think the issue of resources and many other things can be improved. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you, Senator Yusmadi, for highlighting the importance of, for example, needs-based distribution of resources, as well as also the important role of leadership in carrying it through. Perhaps from MCA, Datuk Nicole, well, since you are, well, officially part of the government, any idea on this? I need to sort of balance out both sides. Datuk Nicole, yeah, you need to unmute.
Yes,
yeah,
I've done. Yeah, okay. Of course, before this, I used to mention, race-based politics is a bit outdated, and then a policy-based should be the way, and then could be the way that we are moving forward. That's why I kept saying, of course, as a part of in a part of government, but of course I'm not playing a very big role or not having a very important position in the government, current government right now. But I can't deny I need to convey the message or the voices, the feedback from the ground to the state government, since we are as a part of it. Of course, no more racial politics. This is what I have been mentioning from earlier part. So I think from my experience, or I saw there are lots of, whenever a good policy has been published and been conveyed. So there are lots of the first questions usually will be, is this benefited to a particular races and all that. So I totally disagree with this. So I hope we can seriously, as what I said earlier, a common ground, work, find a common ground and then work together. That's the only way. There's no shortcut. There's no any other way to move forward. That's a few words I would like to add in on that.
Thank you, Datuk Nicole Wong. We have another question about would any incumbent government, would any government indeed push for what the questioner said would be civic education as part of the syllabus in the education curriculum? Would any government in power would have the political will to push for so-called civic education? Perhaps YB Dr. Yee, who has been waiting since about an hour ago. Perhaps you could take a step at this.
Thank you so much, Dr. O. I just want to add on a little bit about the previous question in terms of how do we ensure a bit more equitable distribution among all, and also that I think I fully agree with my fellow colleague, YB Senator, in terms of a need to shift to a more needs-based economic distribution. Of course, many will say this is a political suicide, but this is a conversation that we really need to have if we want a holistic way of addressing issues. My background is healthcare, so I speak majoritarily on healthcare, but I think the same principle also apply in terms of I believe that we need long-term policies, and then the government should not change policy based on the whim or fancy of who the government is, who the prime minister is, or who the minister is. This we have seen the detriment in, especially in the healthcare, when policies changes every time a prime minister ministers change, or even the DG changes. So I think I believe there is a need for maybe an economic task force to actually look into and also to make this whole concept of a needs-based distribution more something more palatable for the general public in Malaysia, come up with a more holistic, a comprehensive kind of economic model, and then have it as like an economic reform paper, so that whichever government, whichever minister, whichever coalition comes into power, that has to be the reference point in terms of moving the country forward, because policies has to be long-term. It cannot be whims on fancy of whoever is in power based on those who want some political points. So I think back to the question that was being thrown under civic education, actually one of the points that I missed and I kind of slipped my mind on what are the game changers in the upcoming election is Undi 18. The reason why is actually when we implemented Undi 18, when we are in PH government, I can be totally open. There were people even within our government that was very skeptical of the reforms itself, because I think the general trend is that the young people the perception is they're anti-establishments, and if we didn't perform as a government at that time, PH, the first to punish us was the young people. But we did it, even so we didn't, we pushed it through, and I was debating and I was pushing for it because we believe in empowering the young people. And we believe in empowering civic education, especially when our country wants to progress towards a more mature democracy, a more mature participatory democracy, and involving the young people. We're looking at 3.8 million new additions to the whole electoral roll, especially with Undi 18 and of course automatic registration being implemented. I believe in civic education. I think one of the things that the PH government tried to start was Sekolah Rukun Negara, where they will go into schools to teach them the principles, not on partisan politics, but on the roles and also the importance of the electoral process, the democratic process of our country. So I think this is very important. I hope the current government, after the statement by the Deputy Youth Minister, the Youth Minister has come out and said that he's still committed to Undi 18, which is something that is, of course, welcome. But I have my doubts whether the current government is willing to push through Undi 18 for the upcoming election, because as we have seen trend, the Clubhouse sensation has burst in the past few weeks, and I've been in a few forums on the Clubhouse here listening to young people especially. They have very good constructive and substantive views, visions, and even ideologies on how our country should progress. This is something I believe the country should tap in, and that is why I hope this civic education should be promoted even from secondary school. I think we're looking at primary, Form 3, Form 4, Form 5, and there has to be some kind of incentives, because if there is like the general incentives in our education system, if there is exams only, then they will study. But I think we have to find out another incentives. Now, we actually have civic education in our high school, secondary school right now. But then from feedbacks, a lot of the teachers use it to teach other subjects because it's not exam. There's no exams to it. But how do we incentivize? How do we instill the importance, not just in the teachers, to look at the students and say, you know what, you guys are going to vote in 1 or 2 years time. I need to make sure that you guys are ready for it. So I think that is something that we really need to look forward to. And Undi 18 will really be a game changer in the next election. Thanks, Steve. Back to you, Dr. O.
Okay, thank you. Now, James, and the other Sarawakian who is now in Australia, I would like you to summarize in 2 minutes, because I have only 2 minutes left, questions such as how would Chinese vote in the upcoming general election, and also, well, indeed, now we have parties with different ideologies. How indeed would they form coalition? How Chinese would vote, and how coalition could indeed be formed by parties with different ideologies. James.
Thank you very much. So very quickly, I think by and large, the Chinese are still sticking with the opposition, in particular the DAP. So I expect the DAPs to still get a Chinese vote. So that's the reason why I said the voting pattern will be fairly similar. So I expect the DAP will still get back about 40 seats without any problem. This is also true in the case of Sarawak. Now, in terms of your second question about whether parties with different ideologies can work together, based on the Malaysian experience, the answer is no. They can't work together. Even if they have a common set of priorities, if they come from different ideologies, it's very difficult. Even if you have the same ideology, you also can't work together. If you look at PAS and PAS and Bersatu, it is PAS and Bersatu are actually splinter parties for UMNO. And in terms of ideological difference, there is no ideological difference between Bersatu and UMNO, and yet they're still trying to kill each other off. So I think when you talk about different ideology, it's really Malaysian politics is partly driven by ideology, but at the end of the day, it's about dominance. And the reason why Malaysian politics is about dominance is because from day one, Malaysian politics is about who gets what. And unfortunately, until we move away from that system where a winner takes all situation, it'll be very difficult to reform Malaysian politics. Thank you.
Well, thank you, James. Well, I would like to thank all the panelists for their time and their willingness to share with us the different scenarios in Malaysian politics. I would just like to end by perhaps calling on all Malaysians to not lose heart in terms of bettering our nations, its politics, in society, and so on. We should continue to take active part in, for example, politics and in the betterment of economy and society. Thank you. I will hand it back to the organizer.